There's 7 big signs that your magic system will be a hit with readers. I know this because I've had a lot of experience with writing magic systems in my own fantasy novels, and through critiquing magic systems for other writers as well. Last year, I ran a contest where 116 authors sent me their magic system ideas, and I've also personally coached over 80 fantasy writers through my editing services, group coaching programs, and live workshops. And through seeing so many examples and common patterns, I recently realized that there are 7 key signs of quality that I look for in a writer's magic system. And the first sign that readers will love your magic system has something to do with the effect it has on your characters and your plot. To explain what this first sign is and why it's so powerful, I need to give you an example from Jade City by Fonda Lee. In Jade City, the magic system revolves around jade, this special stone that grants you superhuman abilities. However, it also carries risks of addiction, severe withdrawal symptoms, and it can even drive you insane. So Lan, who is the leader of the No Peak clan in the city of Janloon, is constantly faced with this dilemma around his use of jade. He knows that he needs to have a lot of jade on his body in order to be perceived as powerful and strong and as a worthwhile leader of this clan as they fight against a rival clan in this city. However, as he begins to struggle from crippling jade symptoms and afflictions, he is confronted with this difficult choice about, well, do I try to preserve my own sanity by not having so much of this jade on me? Or do I take that risk in order to be perceived as powerful and to have this strong facade to intimidate other people in this world? And that's why the first sign that fantasy readers will love your magic system is if it forces characters to make tough decisions that reveal their true nature and maybe even force them to change over the course of your story. Now, to explain the second sign that readers will love your magic system, I need to give you a quick scenario. Let's say your character is trying to get to the top of a building. Now, if your character can fly, they're going to get to the top of the building pretty easily. There's no real conflict or drama around how they're going to do it, and every time we see them go to the top of a building, it's going to feel the same. But let's say your character can't fly, and they need to get to the top of the building, and their power is the ability to shoot webs from their wrist. How much more creativity is required to get to the top of the building? Quite a lot, because your character maybe is going to create a tightrope between buildings so they can walk across to the top. Or maybe they're going to kind of lean back on some webs they've shot out and use it as a slingshot to propel themselves up the building. Or maybe they're even going to attach themselves to a helicopter using their webs and then drop off when they get to the spire of this building. Now, I know you probably don't think of Spider-Man as having a magic system, even though that's basically what it is. But the point is, when your magic system allows for numerous, varied, and creative solutions to the problems in your narrative, readers will be so much more entertained. And something that's actually going to allow for more creative solutions is the next principle I want to discuss, which is interesting limitations, weaknesses, and consequences. Imagine if the One Ring just let you turn invisible and that was it. It would make the Lord of the Rings pretty damn boring. See, the ring is interesting because the more you use it, the more paranoid and greedy you become. And when you use it, Sauron knows where you are. In other words, there are interesting consequences and limitations and weaknesses to this magic. What's the difference between those 3 elements? Well, let me show you how I use them in writing the Sun Warden characters in Kingdom of Dragons, which is in the process of being printed and sent out to our Kickstarter backers at the moment. So first of all, a limitation is a restriction on the abilities of your magic. For example, the Sun Wardens in Kingdom of Dragons have an ability that lets you rewind the shadows over an area so that you can see what was happening a few hours earlier. But of course, you can only see those shadows if the sun was bright enough and people were standing in the correct position to cast them in the first place. Next, a weakness is something where using the magic leaves you vulnerable. For example, in Kingdom of Dragons again, the Sun Wardens have the ability to shoot these sort of molten beams of sunlight from their eyes, kind of like laser vision. But once they use it, it leaves them blind for a few moments afterwards, which understandably makes it risky to use. And then lastly, a consequence is a cost you must pay to use the magic. All Sun Warden abilities derive from their bond with their Sunblade, which is this ancient source made from a strange substance that looks like molten sunlight. But the more you use your Sunblade and the different abilities it gives you, the more it depletes your essence. And if your essence is depleted too much, you end up becoming a corrupted Dark Warden who basically goes insane. Now, it's really important that you understand this idea here. Adding limitations, weaknesses, and consequences to your magic is not just about making it more complex for the sake of making it more complex. Again, it's about forcing your characters to make tough decisions, not making the magic an easy way to escape from the problems of your story, but rather making the magic something where characters are really going to have to assess if they are willing to pay the price. For example, let's take the Sun Wardens again. They know that using their powers will eventually corrupt and turn them into a Dark Warden. So their society has developed to be a very disciplined society with strict religious observances and beliefs, and all Sun Wardens are required to take on an apprentice whose job is basically to kill the Sun Warden before they become a corrupted Dark Warden so that they can take their blade, become the new Sun Warden, and allow that blade to continue on without being tainted by the corruption of a Dark Warden. Now, if you would like some more inspiration for writing the limitations, weaknesses, and consequences in your magic system, I've actually developed a free resource that goes over dozens of ideas to inspire you. You can get it for free by going to jedherne.com/magic limits, or by using the link in the description down below. Now, having interesting limitations is really important, but if you want readers to really love your magic system, then you should be thinking about the next sign, which is that it uses the tree trunk technique. What is this and why is it so powerful? Put simply, the base premise of your magic should be easy to understand in one sentence. If you can't easily explain the core of your magic in one sentence, then you probably have an issue with it in your story. There's two big reasons why, and I think you'll find the second one a little bit surprising. So reason number one is when you can quickly explain your magic, it's a lot easier to hook readers and get them immediately invested in your story. That's kind of obvious. But the non-obvious second reason why it's so critical to have your magic system be easily explainable is because if your magic can be explained in one sentence, then it becomes so much easier for your readers to tell their friends about your magic system. And really, when you think about how books spread, they spread through word of mouth. And if you have a magic system where your readers need to spend half an hour explaining your magic to their friends, it's going to be a very high barrier of difficulty for them to spread the ideas of your book and to get more people invested in your world. Now, here's the thing. This doesn't mean that your magic can't also be complex and full of all these different layers. If you look at the Allomancy magic system in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, you can describe the core premise of this pretty easily. People ingest different metals and burn them inside themselves to grant them with superhuman abilities, like the capacity to push off metal telekinetically, to fly through the air. That is the base level of that magic system. But of course, there's all these different types of metals that give you different abilities. All the different powers can interact in notable ways as well. And then you've got a few other offshoots of this that come up over the course of the story. There's a lot of deeper layers and deeper levels and complexity to that magic, but our entry point into it is extremely simple and very easy for readers to fall into. So the reason why I call this the tree trunk technique is because you want to think about your magic like the trunk of a tree. The base of it is pretty easy to grasp onto, and that's your one sentence pitch of what your magic is. But then as you follow that trunk up, it splits into all these different branches, and there's so much more complexity at the top of the tree. But readers still have that easy entry point that makes it simple for them to get invested in your story. And this leads into the fifth sign that readers will love your magic system, which I call the Pokemon effect. When I was a kid, I would play Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Emerald for hours. Why was it so fun for me to spend all that time just walking back and forth in the long grass to fight wild Pokemon and level up my team? Well, seeing my Pokemon level up, gain new abilities, and eventually become powerful enough to defeat new gym bosses gave me an incredible sense of progression. And if you've played video games before, you'll know how addictive that feeling of progression is. To quote from Nietzsche, happiness is the feeling that power increases, that resistance is being overcome. And I find that the best magic systems have this great inbuilt sense of progress. I mean, when you think about it, progress is really fundamental to all aspects of writing. If you make your readers feel like every sentence, every paragraph, every chapter is progressing your plot along and deepening their understanding of your characters, then readers are going to be along for the ride and they're going to feel invested and entertained by your story. And fantasy readers especially love to see characters start as novices and go through the progress of learning and mastering their particular magical craft. Take the Lightbringer series, for example, by Brent Weeks. This has a really cool magic system where people can basically use colors to create a physical substance called Luxin, and different colors have different properties. So blue Luxin tends to be quite cold and hard, whereas green Luxin is more springy and flexible. Now, our main character, Kip, begins the story as a very novice drafter. That's the name for the magicians in this world. He doesn't really know how to use his magic that much, but the promise is that over the course of this series, we're going to see him begin to level up, to gain new understanding of how to use these abilities, and by the end of the series, maybe he will become someone that actually can master lots of different colors and use the magic in a very creative way to solve the problems in the story. Now, Brant Weeks uses a very clever trick here to amplify the promise of progression at the start of The Black Prism, which is the first book in the series. He gives you some perspective chapters from Gavin Guile, who is the most powerful drafter in this world. And he shows Gavin using some Luxon to create this kind of skimmer machine that allows him to just almost fly across the ocean, or the sea rather, in this world. So what Weeks does here is he shows you the upper limit of the magic with someone who's super talented at it already, and then he brings you right back down to the novice level, and this gap between the two creates an incredible feeling of contrast, which generates a lot of suspense within the reader. Because now the reader is wondering, well, is Kip going to reach that point? What's it going to take for him to reach that point? Is he even capable of reaching it? And you have your readers emotionally hooked on your magic. And this actually leads into the sixth sign that readers will love your magic system, which is that it has unity with your triangle of story. Your fantasy novel fundamentally has three core elements: plot, character, and setting, with theme being created through the intersection of these three elements. That right there is your triangle of story. And if your magic system doesn't relate to your triangle of story, it's going to feel quite gimmicky and boring and just like it was slapped onto the top of all these different concepts. But when you can integrate your magic so that it feels deeply embedded with your plot, your characters, and your world building, that's when you unlock an amazing sense of cohesion and synthesis in your story. Always be asking yourself this question: how do I make things feel more connected? For example, in Blackstone Heart by Michael R. Fletcher, we begin with Crayon crawling from his own grave with no memory of who he is. When he kills another man and takes a sliver of obsidian from that guy's heart, it burrows into his own chest, connecting with a piece of obsidian in his own heart, and he regains a tiny fraction of his former memories. The story then essentially reveals that Crayon has been cloned and kind of split into all these different bodies throughout the world, each with their own sliver of obsidian in their heart, and Crayon has to go and kill them to reclaim their obsidian heart and bring them into his own heart, essentially, to restore memories of his former self and to rebuild his Blackstone heart. As you can tell, this is not a particularly lighthearted or fluffy story. It's a kind of bloody death metal scream of a narrative. It's very grimdark. And so this magical element of being able to restore your memories through killing these kind of clones of yourself and ripping out parts of their heart, it synthesizes really nicely, with Crayon grappling over the question of whether his means justify his ends throughout the series, and also the idea of whether manipulation and lying is justified, which is a big idea that runs through all the books as a whole, and then also the notion of identity and whether you should run from your past self or embrace it. So really, there is an incredibly cohesive quality when you look at this magical element and how it infuses with the rest of the story. And you've probably found in your own experience as a reader that it's almost impossible to describe a great magic system without also going on to describe the characters and the world they inhabit and the plot that they kind of unfold throughout the course of the story. So here's 3 questions I often ask myself and the clients I work with to better integrate magic into the fabric of your story as a whole. Number 1, how does your magic influence your characters' fears, goals, and motivations? For example, maybe your character really deeply craves to become a powerful sorcerer because they think that will give them the approval of their parents. Maybe on the other hand, your character wants nothing to do with the magic because they see it as a source of stress and fear and destruction, and so they're going to be doing everything they can to separate themselves from the magic in this world. The second question I often ask myself to better integrate my magic is, how does the history of magic in this world influence the way society is set up, influence character motivations, and influence backstories? For example, in The Wheel of Time, the male half of the magic was corrupted by the Dark Lord. It was tainted by the Dark Lord. So whenever male magicians try to touch the one power, it has a huge risk of driving them insane. As a result, male wizards in this world are essentially hunted down because everyone's afraid that they're going to go crazy and just start killing people if they begin to use the one power. And then question number 3, in what ways does your magic influence the economy, technology, and cultural makeup of your world? For example, in Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, the secret magical societies of Yale use demonic rituals to manipulate the stock market, predict the future, and even talk with the dead. Now, if you've been following all the signs I've been talking about so far in this video, you should be set up to unlock the next principle for writing a great magic system. And this is probably the biggest one. I would say that out of everything I've talked about in this video, this last principle here is maybe the main draw card for fantasy readers. And it is, of course, originality. Having a fresh and exciting magic system is one of the easiest ways to convince fantasy readers to give your story a go. But how do you actually do this? Well, like I said, if you've been following the previous principles in this video, you should be set up pretty nicely to do this. But going beyond those, there's 3 ideas I'd like to think about when it comes to writing original magic systems. And the first one is to use unconventional sources of inspiration. So for example, as a former architect, I'm really fascinated by the way that the Pantheon in Rome, which is this 2,000-year-old ancient temple, it has a concrete dome that, because of the way the Romans built it, actually grows harder and stronger with every passing year. This is mind-blowing because modern day concrete construction usually only lasts for about 60 years before this thing called concrete cancer kind of goes through it and tears it apart. So looking at that and using it as a source of inspiration for magic, maybe I would say to myself, well, what if there was a way for sorcerers in this world to kind of implant their souls into a building? And the longer that building lasts, and the more people admire that building and develop an emotional connection to it, that feeds into the power of that magician. But obviously, if that building is destroyed or graffitied or people start to hate it, then their power is eroded as well. A second useful way to create originality is simply through combining different concepts. So let's take that same idea that you can invest your soul in something external, and as that thing kind of grows or changes, it influences your own power. But instead of applying it to buildings, let's apply it to trees. Maybe you have a world where magicians kind of plant a tree when they turn 10 years old, and as that tree grows bigger and taller, that grants them more abilities, or it grants them stronger abilities. Maybe you even have something there about how the season that that tree is in affects their powers. Or maybe if the tree is producing fruit or flowers, that also has some impact on their powers as well. What you can see here is as you connect different ideas like this, the combination usually results in something that feels fresh and interesting. And then a third way to develop more unique magic is simply to develop a unique aesthetic. So if you write a kind of quote unquote standard or quote unquote cliched magic system that we've seen done plenty of times before, but you figure out a way to bring in unique sensory details or unique character impacts or a unique emotional experience or a unique tool or ritual that is used to build that magic, then that's probably going to feel quite entertaining and interesting for readers. For example, there's plenty of magic systems out there where knowing the true name of something gives you power over that thing. But the way that Patrick Rothfuss writes about Quoth using the name of the wind in the book of the same title, the prose quality there is just, there's something so mystical and spiritual and almost haunting about the way that he describes it. And as a result, even though we've seen it done before, we haven't seen it done his way before. One of the best ways to write more original magic systems is simply to expose yourself to more ideas. You can watch this video over here to see a contest I ran where 116 authors sent me their magic system ideas, and I picked my favorite one to win $1,000.